Welcome back to the rest of my October book reviews. I'm excited to talk about some of these books, and some of them were a little bit of duds, so let's jump into it. I read the book Survive the Night by Riley Sager, and it was really on theme for Halloween month. We've got our protagonist, Charlie, who feels like she's been losing her mind since especially since her roommate was murdered a couple months before. So she's trying to get back home to her grandmother, and she accepts a ride from a stranger and is trapped in the car with him and starts to suspect that he might have been the killer coming back to finish her off. I feel like the book did a good job at bringing in a lot of suspense. You just were like, something bad's gonna happen pretty much the entire book. Charlie, as the main character, was just such an idiot the whole time. I mean, just call the police. Please just call the police. She stops at payphones multiple times and doesn't just call the police when she thinks she's being, kidnapped by a murderer. She just was not very bright. There's a little bit of that unreliable narrator thing going on because she does kind of see things that aren't there. And I don't know. I think it did have a lot of suspense. I tore through it really quickly, but when you look at it, it just seems a little weak. Just Charlie was not a very strong character. She didn't have, she just didn't seem very realistic. And as well, there wasn't a lot of backstory that was created, or at least not well enough in my book, because I feel like only a certain number of characters were ever introduced throughout the book. So when you have a big reveal, how is that supposed to be a big reveal when there's 4 characters to pick from and we can eliminate these 2? It was a little too narrow in its world building, but I mean, if you just want something quick and easy and suspenseful, this is fine, but I'm sure there's betters out there. One of the most excellent books that I've read recently is 400 Souls, a community history of African America, 1619 through 2019. And this is a compilation. There is, I think, over 80 different authors in this book, and it's a compilation of different activists, professors, experts, all sorts of different people who weigh in on different time periods, starting with the beginning of America and the first Black people in America through present day. And I thought this was beautifully done. They had a chapter focusing on a set number of years, and you could tell each author was different because they would focus more on gender issues, or someone else would focus more on career opportunities. They'd all have an area of focus, but it kind of flowed together really nicely. I really liked how it flowed together, and it had some beautiful poetry interspersed between the chapters, and I thought it was really well done. And yes, it can be a depressing book because it talks a lot about slavery and discrimination and hardships. What I found really inspiring about this book was just its feeling of hope and resilience through difficulty, and looking back on the history of America, specifically the Black people who are living in America currently and have been there throughout the past few hundred years, and their resilience through such horrible circumstances. I thought that it was a really good overview of the history of African peoples in the United States. So, excellent book. I highly recommend it to anyone. I thought it was really worthwhile, especially because you're getting just so many perspectives, and how can you not like to see things from such a well-rounded view of so many different points of view. Anyways, lovely book, highly recommend, go read it. Salt to the Sea by Rita Septis follows the historical event of the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff. And this was super interesting because I didn't know very much about this. In 1945, this ship with mostly refugees was sunk by a Soviet submarine, and it looks like more than 9,000 people lost their lives. And this is an immense tragedy. I didn't know much about it. Very interesting to learn about. I would love to read up more on this. But putting that aside, this is a historical fiction book following a few different characters. And how can they make this boring? I was bored. I was kind of bored throughout this. I feel like the whole point of historical fiction is to make you connect with the characters so that you understand and feel for the historical event more, right? Am I wrong in this? Because I didn't connect with any of the characters. I would have been much more interested if this was just a historical telling, because the characters did nothing for me. They did have a character that was a Nazi, and I feel like I didn't like the caricature. He was the sociopathic, unfeeling, horrible Nazi who, of course, he was evil, and of course he was going to want to kill all the Jews, and he was racist and small-minded. And I understand that people like that did exist during that time, but I think when talking about Nazis, I think the real thing that terrifies me is more that these aren't just the crazy people. These were the normal people who allowed these kinds of things to happen. And I feel like it framed it in a way that, oh yeah, only the complete crazy people who have no human feeling perpetuated these war crimes and these types of things, and everyone else was fine. And no, it was, like a whole group of people that went along with things that weren't right. And I don't know. I don't like that narrative of, Nazis are only horrible people who hate everyone and have no human feeling, because let's be real, they were a lot of normal people. Anyways, aside from that, interesting historical information. It's kind of a meh for me. So I read Death in Her Hands by Atessa Moshfegh, and this, I don't know what to think about this, because I just don't feel like I knew what I was getting into. And this follows an elderly woman who finds a note in the woods that mentions that there is a body somewhere in the woods. And she starts constructing this whole murder mystery in her head. And she has all the characters figured out, and she kind of convinces herself that it's real and that there is a murder going on. And you kind of aren't sure if it's something real or if it's all in her head. And for the most part, it just seems like it's all in her head, but then every once in a while you think, well, maybe there's some truth to all the things she's worried about. And it's just kind of like watching some old lady go crazier and crazier, and it's suspenseful. I feel like, and she reflects a lot on her life with her husband before he died. And I feel like if I read this book in an English class where we really analyzed some of the symbolism and stuff, I might have enjoyed it more. I feel like it needed a reading a little less literally than what I was giving it. And instead I read through and I'm like, wait, where's the murderer? What's happening? And I just don't feel like I was quite in the right mindset for this one. So if you want like a literary, interesting look into the mind of an elderly, lonely woman, go for this one. If you're looking for a fun suspense to read for Halloween, maybe skip this one. If anybody's read this one, please let me know, because I'm just not quite sure what to think about this one. And on to other books that I just felt kind of meh about. I read The 1 in a Million Boy by Monica Wood, and it follows an 11-year-old boy who makes friends with a 104-year-old woman, and he starts trying to learn her life story. And he's a unique boy who's interested in Guinness World Records. And one day the young boy drops dead unexpectedly from a rare condition, and the story picks up with the 104-year-old woman and the boy's parents coming to terms with things and looking back on the 104-year-old woman's life. There was a lot going on in this book, and I never felt like I really connected with any of it. I got kind of bored, honestly, and I got that thing where I get annoyed with precocious children in books, which I can't say because the next book had that and I loved it, so, I mean, who knows, but it didn't work for me, and I couldn't quite figure out what lessons were learned by the end or what the point was. But it was fine. I mean, it was fine. It's just a meh for me. I'm kind of just have no thoughts. It's just kind of meh. I don't know. And after reading this, I started thinking, I'm so bored. Do I just not like reading anymore? Why are all these books kind of meh? The past few books, I don't even care. I don't want to read anything else. And it was super frustrating because I'm like, I love reading and I just haven't been into any of these books lately. Maybe it's me, maybe my attention span is shot. And that's where we get to the next one. I found the book, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, to be absolutely delightful. I listened to this and I listened to it in a day because I couldn't stop and I just kept like any second I had sticking my earbud in and see what happens next. I loved this one. So this follows Linus Baker. He's a 40-year-old man who's boring and stuck in his routines, and he works for a department in charge of magical youth, and he oversees government orphanages of kids that have magical powers. And he gets sent on a special assignment out to an island with a bunch of kids that have even more extreme powers than in these other orphanages, and he's supposed to observe and make sure that it's run appropriately and that the kids are safe and happy. And on the way, he learns about himself and he falls in love with all the kids, and there's a bit of a romance, and I just thought it was absolutely delightful. Honestly, it was a little bit derivative. Like, I can see that. It's basically, X-Men meets a little bit of Good Omens. I don't know. There's a bunch of influences you can see that it came from, but did that make it less delightful? No, it was just delightful. I was smiling and kind of bouncing up and down as I listened to the end of this book. I just thought it was really sweet and heartfelt. Now, I did read that there were some major criticisms. People thought that this was based on government schools for Indigenous people, and that it was glorifying those schools. And I could see how that would be a very bad thing. But I think even if this, if you're saying that this is an allegory for Indigenous schools, and I know that many of them were bad, I think if you read through the rest of the book, you realize it's not glorifying them. It's saying this specific one is a wonderful home because all the rest are really horrible, and there needs to be a big overhaul in order to protect these children better, and that this is not the way to take care of children. And I feel like it came to the right conclusions. And so to all the criticisms, I understand, but I feel like if you read the whole thing, you might love it as much as I do. I hope. I just enjoyed this completely. And that is all the books that I have read for the month of October. Thanks for coming along with me. If you have any book recommendations, I really need them, so please put them in the comments down below. And if you have any comments on these books, I really would love to hear them. I would love to hear any opinions, whether they agree with me or completely disagree with me. I want to hear what you think. And I will be back next month with books I've read in November. See ya!